I'm the Criminologist, the shadow that walks you back through the crime scene, the steady breath in the interrogation room. Tonight, I'll guide you through two cases that slipped into darkness, and the relentless work that pulled them back into the light. Listen closely. Every detail matters. Eva Shoen, a 44-year-old Norwegian bee-born woman, was married to Sam Shoen, the eldest son of Leonard Shoen, often referred to as LS, who founded the U-Haul trucking empire in 1945. The couple lived with their two young daughters, Bente and Esben, in an isolated $400 General log cabin on Skunk Creek Drive, approximately 4 miles outside the mountain resort town of Telluride, Colorado. Starting with just $50 in savings after World War II, LS developed the concept of one-way trailer rentals that revolutionized the moving industry. By 1990, the company had grown to nearly $1 billion in annual sales, with a fleet of 66 000 trucks and 100 $0,000 trailers, serviced through over 10,000 outlets across the United States and Canada. About 95% of the company's stock was distributed to his children, retaining only 2% for himself, believing this would create a family dynasty. This decision would prove to be his greatest mistake, as it set the stage for a vicious power struggle that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In 1986, a faction led by sons Joe and Mark successfully orchestrated a boardroom coup that removed their father from control of the company. They were able to accomplish this by securing the support of enough shareholders, including their sister Katrina Carlson, who provided a crucial swing vote. Sam Shoen, who held an MBA and medical degree from Harvard, had been serving as president and CEO of Amerco. However, following the takeover, the working relationship between Sam and his brothers became untenable. The situation carried constant criticism, countermanded orders, and marathon board meetings lasting up to 12 hours. Unable to function effectively under these conditions, Sam resigned from his position in 1987. The family feud reached extraordinary levels of hostility, including several disturbing incidents. For example, at a 1989 stockholders meeting in Reno, Nevada, tensions exploded into physical violence. Mike Shoen, who supported his father and Sam, brought a tape recorder to document the proceedings. But he was confronted by Mark and Joe as he attempted to leave. According to LS's account, Mark ferociously attacked Mike, continuing to punch him even after he was down. This beating occurred in full view of all attendees, shocking everyone present. Psychiatrist Dr. Jerry Day in 1979 said the following regarding the incident: "Their desire for power is absolute and insatiable. The more they have, the more they want." As you'd expect, numerous lawsuits and countersuits were generated between the family factions. In one particularly bitter exchange, Joe cut off his father's retirement compensation, claiming that LS was disloyal to the company that he had founded. LS, once worth hundreds of millions, found himself in financial distress and was forced to sell his Las Vegas mansion. He described himself as basically bankrupt. On the evening of August 5, 1990, Sam Shoen made a last-minute decision to travel to Phoenix on business, leaving Eva alone with their two daughters and a visiting friend. This unexpected absence would later fuel speculation about whether Sam had been the intended target rather than Eva. The family's 7 guard dogs, which normally would have alerted the household to any intruders, had been confined to the basement because their barking had disturbed the children while they watched television. Between midnight and 2:00 a.m. on August 6th, an intruder entered the house through an unlocked back door. Using what investigators determined was a .25 caliber pistol, the killer shot Eva once in the back of the head. The crime was discovered the next morning when Eva's daughter made a call to police. She said, "Excuse me, my mom. I woke up. She's dead on the staircase." Sheriff Bill Masters arrived at the scene to find Eva's body at the top of the main staircase leading to the second-floor bedroom. There were no signs of forced entry, burglary, or assault. The investigation yielded minimal physical evidence at the crime scene. The bullet recovered from Eva's skull bore distinctive markings that could potentially identify the weapon if it were found. However, investigators discovered only one significant piece of evidence: a pair of sunglasses found near the home. The bullet analysis revealed that the weapon was a .25 caliber Lorsen handgun, which had a particular design flaw that created distinctive markings on fired bullets. This information would later prove valuable, though the murder weapon was never recovered. Given the timing and circumstances of the murder, investigators immediately considered the possibility that it was connected to the ongoing U-Haul family feud. LS openly described his daughter-in-law's death as an assassination and suggested to authorities that it might be related to the corporate battle. Bill Masters, who had been on the job for 10 years, had never handled a murder case before. The department's limited resources were quickly overwhelmed by the complexity and high-profile nature of the investigation. The situation was further complicated by the involvement of U-Haul's private investigators who had been hired by Mark and Joe Shoen to assist in finding the killer. However, court documents later revealed that these investigators passed inaccurate or unsubstantiated information about Sam to the sheriff's department, creating additional suspicion. For 3 years following the murder, the case remained unsolved and gradually moved into the cold case files. The lack of progress was particularly frustrating given the resources that had been devoted to the investigation. Sam had offered a $250 $1 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction, while LS had contributed additional funds for investigative expenses. The U-Haul private investigators continued their own parallel investigation, though their activities remained controversial. During this period, the family feud continued to rage through the courts. Multiple lawsuits and countersuits were filed between the various factions, with allegations ranging from corporate mismanagement to character defamation. The murder had become a focal point in these legal battles, with different family members making accusations and denials about potential involvement. In 1993, 3 years after Eva's murder, the case was featured on the television program Unsolved Mysteries. Following the broadcast, a viewer contacted the show's tip line with information that would prove to be the breakthrough investigators needed. The caller reported that his brother-in-law, Frank Heiress, had confessed to killing, quote, that woman up in Telluride in 1990. Surprisingly, Frank had provided the tipster with specific details about the murder that had not been released to the public. Most significantly, he knew that Eva had been shot in the back with a .25 caliber pistol. Information that only the killer or someone with intimate knowledge of the crime would possess. Investigators quickly traced Frank to New Mexico, where they discovered he had an extensive criminal record, including convictions for burglary and rape. The 38-year-old man had been on parole at the time of Eva's murder, making him a particularly viable suspect. Further investigation revealed that he had indeed been in the Telluride area during the weekend of August 5th and 6th of 1990, attending a music festival. While the confession to a relative provided a strong lead, investigators needed physical evidence to build a prosecutable case against Frank. Their break came when they questioned his travel companion, who revealed crucial information about the journey back to Arizona following the murder. According to the companion, during their drive home from Telluride, Frank had thrown 2 bundles of clothing out of the car window at some point along the 400-mile route. This behavior had seemed unusual at the time, but took on new significance in light of the murder investigation. Acting on this information, detectives launched an extensive search along the highway between Telluride and Frank's destination in Arizona. In a stroke of luck, construction crews had recently moved a pile of dirt along the route, exposing a bundle of preserved clothing that matched the description provided. The arid climate had helped preserve the materials, maintaining potential evidence that might otherwise have been destroyed. On one of the shirts in the bundle, forensic experts discovered a single strand of hair. Using sophisticated analytical techniques, officials examined the hair's color and structural characteristics, comparing them to samples taken from Eva. The analysis determined that the hair was a close match to Eva's hair, providing the physical link between Frank and the crime scene. When investigators presented the hair evidence linking Frank to Eva's murder, he realized that denial was no longer a viable option. Faced with this evidence, Frank confessed to the murder. However, his version of events differed significantly from the initial investigative theories about a professional assassination connected to the family feud. According to his confession, Frank had come to Telluride with the intention of committing burglaries, specifically targeting what he believed were drug dealers' houses. He had selected the Show residence because it appeared unoccupied. He stated that the signs were no dogs barking. The house was dark and he found an unlocked door. Frank claimed he entered through the unlocked back door and went upstairs looking for valuables, as the second floor would be the most likely location to find expensive items. When he entered Eva's room, he was surprised to see her awake and reading a book. When Eva saw the intruder, she yelled at him to leave the house, and a struggle ensued. According to Frank, his gun discharged accidentally during this confrontation, fatally wounding Eva. He claimed the shooting was unintentional and that the event was far from a planned assassination. To support his account, Frank provided investigators with details about other burglaries he had committed in the area that same night. Police were able to verify these claims by contacting property owners who confirmed that their homes had indeed been broken into and specific items stolen, exactly matching Frank's descriptions. On October 26, 1994, Frank accepted a plea agreement for the lesser charges of manslaughter and second-degree burglary. This arrangement allowed him to avoid a potential first-degree murder conviction while still receiving substantial prison time. At his sentencing hearing, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. He apologized to Eva's family and provided additional details about how he committed the murder, though he maintained that it was not premeditated. Despite the conviction, several aspects of the physical evidence remained unexplained, continuing to fuel speculation about whether the complete truth had been revealed. These unresolved issues included several significant forensic inconsistencies that Frank could not or would not explain. Perhaps most mysteriously, the autopsy had revealed 2 injection marks on Eva's body located near her breast area. Medical examiners found no evidence of any recent medical procedures that could account for these marks, nor were any needles or drug paraphernalia found at the crime scene. The presence of these injection sites suggested possible drug involvement or some form of chemical restraint, elements that did not fit with Frank's account of a spontaneous shooting during a burglary. Another significant inconsistency involved a piece of the bloody bedsheet from Eva's bedroom. A section of the sheet had been deliberately cut out and removed from the scene, creating an obvious gap in the blood-stained fabric. When questioned about this, Frank claimed he had taken the piece because he thought some of his blood might be on it. However, this explanation raised several problems. If he was concerned about leaving his blood behind, why didn't he also remove portions of the bloody mattress underneath the sheet? Moreover, he maintained that he had not been bleeding in the house, making his explanation internally inconsistent. Medical testimony presented during the investigation indicated that Eva would have lost consciousness within seconds of being shot in the head. However, her body was found at the top of the main staircase, suggesting she had moved from her bedroom after being shot. The path from the bedroom to the staircase showed no blood trail, which would have been expected if Eva had moved while bleeding from her head wound. This discrepancy in the evidence suggested that either the medical testimony was incorrect or there were aspects of Eva's final moments that Frank had not revealed. As for the business matters within the family, the legal battles continued after Frank's conviction. In 1994, a jury found that Joe and Mark Shoen had violated their fiduciary duties in their takeover of the company, ordering them to pay nearly $1.5 billion in damages to Sam and LS. The award included $70 million in punitive damages against Joe personally for what the court characterized as hateful and malicious behavior. Afterward, the family animosity continued. Sam gave interviews in which he suggested his brothers may have been involved in setting him up as a suspect in his wife's murder. When Mark sued for Leal over these statements, the legal battle continued for years. The Colorado Court of Appeals ultimately ruled in favor of Sam, finding that Mark had failed to prove the statements were false or made with actual malice. The court noted several factors that supported Sam's right to express his suspicions, including the fact that Mark's private investigators had provided inaccurate or unsubstantiated information about Sam to the sheriff's department during the original investigation. Colleen Reed was a 28-year-old accountant living in Austin, Texas. Born in Louisiana, Reed had built a successful career and established herself as a beloved member of her community. She was described by her boyfriend as a gift from God. 4 days after Christmas 1991, on December 29th, Reed made what seemed like a routine decision that would tragically cost her life. She drove her new Mazda Miata to a car wash near downtown Austin to clean her vehicle. The timing was especially tragic for Reed, who had been discussing marriage and future plans with her boyfriend. The abduction occurred in broad daylight at a public location, making it all the more shocking and brazen. According to witness accounts and later testimony from accomplice Alva Hank Worley, he and a man named Kenneth McDuff spotted Reed at the car wash while he and Worley were driving around Austin to get high. When McDuff saw Reed, he announced his intention to kidnap her. He pulled into the car wash and parked behind Reed's bay, jumped out of his vehicle, grabbed her by the throat, and pulled her into the back seat of his car. According to Worley's later confession, the duo drove north on Interstate 35. While McDuff subjected Reed to prolonged torture in the back seat for approximately 45 minutes, he bound her hands with shoelaces, repeatedly raped her, and burned her with cigarettes while she screamed for help. The torture was so severe that Reed's screams were described as hurting Worley's ears. Throughout this ordeal, Reed begged Worley for help, but he claimed he was too terrified of McDuff to intervene. After driving to a field approximately 200 to 300 yards from McDuff's parents' home in Bell County, the violence reached its climax. McDuff dragged a Reed from the car and struck her in the face with such force that Worley described it as sounding, quote, like a tree limb breaking, causing her to go limp. McDuff then placed her unconscious body in the trunk and drove Worley back to his apartment. This was the last time Worley saw Colleen Reed alive. McDuff had told Worley he was going to use her up. As for Kenneth McDuff, he was born January 24, 1946, in Rosebud, Texas, and was the fifth of 6 children born to John Allen and Addie McDuff. Contrary to many assumptions about serial killers coming from abusive backgrounds, McDuff was actually spoiled by his family, particularly his mother, who was nicknamed the pistol-packing mama because she once threatened a school bus driver with a gun. At Rosebud High School, McDuff was a bully who carefully selected weaker victims. This behavior began after he lost a fight to an athletic and popular student, teaching him to target only those he perceived as vulnerable. He eventually dropped out of school to work for his father's concrete business. Not all that long after, at the age of 20, he began his killings. His first documented murders occurred on August 6, 1966, along with accomplice Roy Dale Green. McDuff encountered 3 teenagers, Robert Brand, his girlfriend Edna Sullivan, and Brand's cousin Mark Dunham at a baseball field in Everman, Texas. McDuff forced the teenagers into their car's trunk at gunpoint, then drove them to a remote field where he shot both boys. He and Green then repeatedly Sullivan before McDuff strangled her with a 3-foot-long piece of broomstick, breaking her neck and earning him the moniker the Broomstick Killer. Green, overcome with guilt, confessed to the crime and agreed to testify against McDuff in exchange for a 25-year sentence. It was here that McDuff was convicted and sentenced to death. His death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment following the 1972 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Furman v. Georgia. After serving 23 years in prison, McDuff was paroled on October 11, 1989, as part of a massive early release program designed to address severe prison overcrowding. The parole board had forgotten McDuff's vicious history and viewed him merely as another prisoner in an overcrowded system. Additionally, corruption played a major role in his release. McDuff's mother, Addie, paid approximately $200 to attorneys in 1988 to secure her son's release. The parole board chairman, James Granberry, and his administration were later accused of accepting payments from prisoners and their families to facilitate early releases. McDuff briefly violated his parole by making threats and was returned to prison, but was released again on December 18, 1990. Within days of his various releases, he is believed to have begun killing again. His documented post-release crimes began in October 1991 with the murder of worker Brenda Thompson in Waco. 5 days later, he killed 21-year-old Virginia Moore. But back on the topic of Colleen Reed, when she failed to return home on December 29, 1991, her boyfriend contacted police around 9:00 p.m. Officers found her abandoned Mazda at the car wash, confirming she had been abducted. The case initially proved challenging due to the lack of security cameras at the car wash. The investigation was further hampered by the fact that McDuff's post-release victims were spread across several Texas counties, making coordination difficult. However, law enforcement agencies gradually began connecting disappearances to McDuff's presence in various areas. A crucial break came with the March 1, 1992 disappearance of Melissa Northrup, a 22-year-old pregnant store clerk at a Waco Quick Pack convenience store where McDuff had previously worked. The discovery of McDuff's abandoned car near the store linked him directly to this crime. Several witnesses testified that he had previously tried to enlist their help in robbing the store. When Melissa's body was discovered on April 26, 1992, floating in a water-filled gravel pit with part of her lower torso missing, it matched a body disposal method McDuff had previously described to associates. The breakthrough in Reed's case came through the work of Sheriff Tim Steglich, who identified Alva Worley as one of McDuff's known associates. Tim employed a relationship-building approach, visiting Worley multiple times at his CD Motel residence to establish trust. Initially, Worley provided no useful information and appeared extremely nervous during interviews. However, Tim's persistence paid off when Worley called him one evening, saying he needed to speak. When Tim picked him up, Worley confessed and said, "I was with McDuff when he took that girl in Austin." He described how he and McDuff had gone to Austin to get bent, spotted Reed at the car wash, and kidnapped her. Worley admitted to driving while McDuff tortured Reed during the journey north on Interstate 35. The confession was particularly powerful because it included details that could be corroborated with witness accounts of the abduction and provided investigators with their first clear picture of what had happened to Reed. Worley's testimony would prove crucial in both the Northrup and Reed murder trials. McDuff fled to Kansas City, Missouri, where he worked at a refuse collection company under the fake name Richard Fowler. The break came when his case was featured on America's Most Wanted on May 1, 1992. Gary Smithy, one of McDuff's co-workers, recognized him and contacted police. On May 4th, McDuff was arrested by a surveillance team that included Deputy U.S. Marshal Thomas Parnell McNamara Jr. and his brother, Deputy U.S. Marshal Mike McNamara. Coincidentally, their fathers had arrested McDuff for his original 1966 crimes. Despite convicting McDuff for Reed's murder in February 1994, her body remained missing for 7 years. This created unprecedented legal challenges, as there was very little Texas law could do for prosecuting murders without a victim's body. The search for Reed's remains became an obsession for investigators, particularly for the men who arrested her killer. In 1998, as McDuff's execution approached, he finally gave specific directions to burial sites. In September 1998, he directed investigators to specific locations where they found the remains of Brenda Thompson and Regina Moore. Finding Reed's grave proved more difficult with the search team directed only to a Brazos River bridge between two gravel roads in Falls County. Eventually, authorities brought McDuff from death row to the burial site. From the back seat of a Ford Taos, McDuff surveyed the area and told investigators exactly where to dig. On October 6, 1998, Reed's remains were discovered in a shallow grave. As for Kenneth McDuff, he was executed by lethal injection on November 17, 1998, at the Huntsville unit in Texas. At age 52, he became the only person in American history to have been assigned 2 different death row numbers and sentenced to 2 different forms of execution. Originally sentenced to the electric chair for his 1966 crimes, then to lethal injection for his 1990s murders. His final words before execution were, "I'm ready to be released. Release me." For his last meal, he requested 2 T-bone steaks with, quote, "all the fixings." At the time of his execution, McDuff reportedly had a terminal case of hepatitis C and cirrhosis of the liver. You've been listening to Criminologist. If a single clue or name sparked something in you, don't let it fade. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and come back to the room where evidence speaks and the past refuses to stay quiet. Until next time, stay sharp,